Hello, my name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'm joined by two colleagues who I'll ask to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Richard Cooper. I'm the Temporary Chief Constable of West Mercia.
And I am Rachel Jones and I am the Temporary Deputy Chief Constable for West Mercia.
So we're here today as part of my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the service our communities across Worcestershire, Shropshire and Herefordshire receive from West Mercia Police, understanding work to deliver my priorities as set within the West Mercia Safer Communities Plan are being delivered, and ultimately understanding how safe our communities are and their confidence in our service that they receive from West Mercia Police. I know that there are incredibly hardworking West Mercian officers and staff across the communities in West Mercia, tackling crime and protecting the public, working hard to do the very best for our community. But I also know that sometimes the level of service that our community receive is not necessarily to their expectations. Sometimes that level of service either doesn't get met or indeed things go wrong as a result of that service. But it's really important as part of my work as holding the chief to account. It's about how we as leaders improve the system that your hardworking officers and staff are working in to deliver those vital services for our community. And that's why, as part of ensuring that the voice of the public is at the heart of policing, in my role as Commissioner, I want to bring to life some of the views of those who experience the service of West Mercia Police and making sure that their views are heard. Before today, I ran a number of virtual focus groups where more than 40 individuals attended, and indeed making sure that we had a cross-section of society giving their views, their lived experience of some of the services that our community receive. We have a wider system of assurance and accountability, and as part of running this session and recording it, is the public can understand how that scrutiny works. And indeed, if those watching at home are interested in certain sections of it, you can use the skip function as part of the video to look at the timestamps if there are some areas that you are particularly interested. And indeed, if you want to leave a comment underneath this video or make contact with my office directly, we will be able to look at those issues as well for you. So we're going to look at 4 different areas as part of this session. The first one being responsive policing, and we know in the world that we live in that the way that we are responded to can often set the tone for our confidence in the service, but also at a time in need, in an emergency, contacting and having a prompt response can literally be a matter of life or death. So responsive policing is right at the heart of my plan here in West Mercia. And we have seen some change in things like confidence. And indeed, most recently, though, we have seen confidence in policing stabilise. I would suggest a really high level, 80%. I could imagine that as a politician, having an 80% confidence level, that would be pretty impressive. But we have seen it over time fluctuate, but stabilise more recently. We've also seen our communities change. So accessing more services online or over the telephone than traditionally in person. But we also see a significant volume. So over 10,000 calls for service roughly a week. And indeed, some of those we do know have not necessarily gone in the way that the force. But ultimately, it's understanding those negative experiences as well as positive experiences to drive the improvement. So what we're going to do first is just hear a short video of some of the feedback we've had, and then we're going to go and discuss some of the areas that are raised.
With regards to response, I've had the calls to call the police before Christmas, using a couple of times really regarding antisocial behaviour in our village. And we're very much directed to use the 101 function, unless, of course, it's an emergency, in which case you do 999. So I had called to use both systems, unfortunately, and the 999 system was very effective, and you obviously get an action from it. I think the disappointing thing for me with 101 is how long it takes to get through. And when you do get through, you get passed around a bit, and then there's no follow-up, there's no number, and nobody checks on it afterwards, which was, disappointing. Also, having to use the 101 online system is quite laborious. Well, my concern there is that other people may get put off using it and reporting crimes because of how long it takes to use that particular function.
101 online and phone, found them very unresponsive to that. When the response has happened, which can be days or weeks later, we've had to chase it up. Again, it was for antisocial behaviour, but was quite a violent and threatening antisocial behaviour. We actually found that it had been classified as completed and didn't get followed up. And once we actually found out that the system hadn't been up and running on the day, and the crime reference we had never got entered into the system. So what tedious, laborious, also very poor in terms of quality of outcome.
And I just wanted to really share my experience of when I phoned 101 in particular. Unfortunately, over the last kind of 12, 18 months, I've had to do that on 2 or 3 occasions due to threats made from a parent towards myself and towards entering school grounds. And unfortunately, I've been a little bit disappointed with the response that I've got, because she's not actually on the premises. On the premises, obviously I would have dialed 999. However, I didn't have a response when requesting presence. And I think I felt quite vulnerable as a head teacher then with a school full of children when I'm receiving threats from a parent, as I say, to come to school, to do all sorts of things to the school. And especially when you're rural, I think the concern around the lack of police presence with that is, yes, if she comes to school and I dial 999, which I can do, how long is that going to take for somebody to get there when I've got a school full of children?
So we see there a vignette of some of the experience that people feed back, and it is important to contextualise the significant volume of contact that the force gets weekly, and these are just a very, very small snapshot. But one of the individuals raises that difference or perceived difference in response to the 999 versus 101. Now, I absolutely get in the nature of non-emergency is it's not a pressing emergency, but how as chief do you balance that difference between the emergency and non-emergency contact in terms of the resources you've got available?
So you're absolutely right in terms of the prioritisation that obviously needs to occur in respect of 999 calls and 101 calls, and many of the members of the public recognise themselves, for which I'm grateful. We will always prioritise answering 999 calls. We generally do so within 10 seconds on 90% of occasions, but our core handlers are able to do both. And officers and staff who we use to dispatch our resources to incidents at times of high demand can also answer the telephone. One challenge that has been a real difficulty for us, and we're not alone in this, there's other police forces experiencing it as well in the last few years, has been a change in the proportion of contacts that come to us via 999 and 101. So a much higher proportion of the calls that we receive now are on emergency number compared to the 101 number. Now, I will be totally straightforward in the conversation with you, Commissioner. I think that occasionally people phone 999 because of their frustration and perhaps experiencing a delay to get through to a 101. But we have noticed a step change, whether it's societal in terms of a greater impatience regarding receiving a service, and I don't think that's reflected in any of the examples that have been given as part of your consultation, but nationally people using 999 much more frequently than was previously the case. And I'd encourage anyone watching this video to please use 999 responsibly, because we will always answer it as promptly as we can. But we've always got resources available to answer both 999 calls and 101 calls. We've also improved the technology available to us in our core handling centre so that the telephony is more reliable, so that there is less chance of our ability to answer the phone being impinged upon by technology. And that combination of having the right resource available, we've filled the posts that are part of the organisation's core handling capability, so a very low vacancy factor. And then I have been in conversations with you also regarding increasing the number of posts available to answer the phone. So on any given day, there's a prioritisation that takes place based on the number of 999 calls coming in, the number of 101 calls. 999s will always take priority and people will understand why. But based on improvements in our technology and filling the posts available and looking to increase the number of call takers that answer the phone, we're confident that our performance in respect of 101 answering will continue to improve. And certainly in the last few months, we've seen a fairly consistent improvement, so that now approximately 70% of 101 calls are being answered within 2 minutes during this year. That's still somewhere short of where we would like to be, but I think reflects some of the improvements around technology and resource that I've alluded to.
That's the other part of the commitment, is the fact that we recognise that the non-emergency performance can be better, i.e. we want to see it improved and taking action to improve it. Just coming back very briefly to this balance over roughly the same number of calls, but the split is different between emergency and non-emergency. You know, the person in the street might say, well, it's the same number of calls. Why does it mean that the performance is going to get worse?
So in simple terms, we will stop what we're doing to answer a 999 call, and a 999 call will override other calls in the system to be presented to the person who might answer it. And so that puts additional pressure on the call handler, and 999 calls then tend to require a greater degree of immediate action in terms of our dispatchers can fall back to answer the phones. We've got a very flexible system, but a 999 call will typically require further action. So the dispatchers of resources immediately to the scene. And so that level of priority that's afforded tends to have a very significant impact compared to a 101 call, where we might be able to arrange to call back the person to speak to them in slower time, or perhaps the follow-up can take place an hour or so later. So we'll prioritise the resource. 999 trumps everything.
And in terms of responding to the incident, I get the call taking element, but in relation to how then what happens afterwards, you've heard some of the feedback being that they didn't always feel the feedback was there, etc. But in terms of an emergency, have you got an assessment as to what the organisation's response to those immediate response, the police action after the call is like?
Yes, so where the call has been received and it's a 999 call, on every call, one of our handlers will perform an initial risk assessment, essentially. So what's the nature of the threat, what harm might be suffered, what's our investigative responsibilities, and where we determine that an emergency response is required, we will dispatch officers immediately. We'll look across the local policing areas to find the most appropriate and closest response, and we set ourselves a target of being there within 20 minutes in all cases. And we meet that approximately 80% of the time on average. It could and should be higher, but you'll appreciate, as will many of the people watching this video, the nature of the geography across the 3 counties, that some areas are a long way apart in terms of the rurality of our counties, but we generally make quick but sophisticated decisions in terms of what's the level of risk associated with this incident. We make a very straightforward classification of if something is an emergency, it receives what we call a grade 1 response, and officers will use their driving training and their exemptions to get there as quick as they safely can.
Some of our communities, and there was an example in the video, said there's a fear about the time it might take to get there. How would you reassure myself and the public that actually overall it is more likely than not that police can get there, in a suitable time to deal with that emergency, and indeed if you're not reassured, what you're doing to help improve that situation?
I think the public should be reassured regarding emergencies, and I appreciate that certainly the law-abiding members of the public who are watching this session may be unaware of the levels of policing that exist within their local areas. We are resourced effectively to be able to respond to emergencies when the public need us. And that is the base level of expectation that should never change within policing, that where there is a genuine need for an emergency response by a police officer, we will be able to deploy resources appropriately. And there's beyond the response officers that members of the public will see in their local areas, we've also got roads policing officers, we have armed officers, we have many other contributory resources who we can deploy in times of extremis. So we are resourced effectively to be able to respond to emergencies. We will deprioritise certain things so we can respond to emergencies. So if there is a genuine cause where a member of the public feels that they need an emergency response from the police, they must never hesitate in thinking, am I likely to get a response? Because we will always prioritise the response to an emergency, and I can reassure people that they will receive that emergency response.
Some of the feedback in the video, but also in more generally, is around sometimes the level of service that's received. So I know we're talking about emergency, but talking predominantly about non-emergency. There's sometimes more complex or indeed slower time type issues. That concern, given that there isn't good customer service, i.e. Being given clear expectations as to what will happen, being given the right information, all the elements of things that give us confidence that the organisation is responding. What are you doing about that as chief to ensure that that's not the case as far as possible, and that the levels of confidence once people have made contact with the organisation either is maintained or goes up?
So providing a really good service when people need us is something that is incredibly important to me and to the organisation. So in terms of making sure that the service is responsive, we are seeking to improve the service we provide in response to 101 calls. We've recently introduced a callback system that members of the public will be familiar with from other calls they make, where if we're unable to answer the phone whilst people are waiting, they can select the option to have us phone them back, so that at a time convenient to them, we can phone them back when it may be that our 999 demand is peaking at that point. Then going forward, we frequently monitor on a monthly basis the levels of satisfaction that people have with our service around certain crime types. And that is a really important performance measure for us in terms of the level of satisfaction when people have phoned us, in terms of the immediate response, in terms of the level of service they receive, in terms of the attitude of the officer, and in terms of the amount of follow-up. And Rachel, as Deputy Chief Constable, monitors that performance on a monthly basis, and it's something that is the very top of our list of things in terms of checking.
Indeed, the call centre performance features in our weekly conversation pretty consistently. Thank you. I just want to briefly touch on the other non-emergency route website. Some of the frustration expressed there and elsewhere is that it's not straightforward to do. It's a bit clunky. It's a bit time-consuming, and the like. Those that are listening, or those that are thinking of reporting something non-emergency, why should somebody use the online service rather than using the telephone system?
We're really keen that we offer people a choice of mechanisms, and those who are more comfortable using the online reporting service should feel very confident that every online report we receive will ultimately be risk assessed, will be scrutinised in the same way as a telephone call. And for some people, it's safer to be able to choose their moment to report something to us online. We receive an increasing number of online reports, so generally it's in excess of 100 reports a day via the online service, and we have configured what is a national product to have a West Mercia feel in terms of the ability of members of the public to report things online. It's obviously available 24/7. It's monitored very frequently. We have staff who are in place to review the online submissions, and then we're also seeking to develop our online response, so that if people are more comfortable perhaps in an online setting, we now are able to send someone a link to their mobile telephone, which means they would be able to open up a video conference with us where we can collect any necessary evidence that we need on their call. So we refer to that as rapid video response. And we can use that to follow up on online reports that we've received. I'm also very pleased that as part of our service. We've developed a 24/7 service using British Sign Language for those in our communities who are hard of hearing. So again, that there are different mechanisms dependent on people's needs. We're also examining, as many forces are, the ability to develop a chat reporting mechanism that I hope to see follow in due course. So lots of mechanisms by which people can report things to us. In terms of the question around confidence in the online experience, it's monitored. It will receive the same response or a level of response that's equivalent to that if you phone us. And then we can also follow up in a digital setting if need be by virtue of an online conversation via video.
I've been and seen the teams, and indeed they're the same teams answering the telephone, as you say, flexing resource across. But people talk about the long and complicated nature of all the information it needs. But it's right to say that the information recorded in the online form is exactly the same information that would get captured if they spoke to somebody on a telephone. There's no more information required, is there?
No, and people will appreciate, I'm sure, that by virtue of the fact that we deal with such a breadth of issues, and many of the issues that we deal with are high risk, that there is a requirement for us to collect quite a lot of information so that we can inform providing the best possible response. So we're always looking to streamline that service, but we are providing a more complicated response than perhaps some other settings where people might submit an online inquiry, and the matters that we're dealing with have a higher consequence, and so it's only appropriate that we capture as much relevant information as possible.
I want to go on to talk about visible policing, if we can. So here in West Mercia, there are a record number of police officers, the most ever, over 2,500 in total. But to use a phrase, it doesn't feel like it. And some of the communities feed back to me that they don't feel that police officers are in abundance. But again, probably link back a little bit to that those might not ordinarily see those police officers that are in our communities. One of the common threads within the session and in the post back that I receive is about the Bobby on the beat. Not enough to simply drive through an area, but in still being part of that community. As you'll know, within the heart of my plan, that policing with the community is a priority, making sure that we are embedded as a police service, and indeed the community see policing as part of their community rather than a visitor to or through. I'm incredibly supportive of your mission to free up through use of technology and process police officers and staff from those other bureaucratic burdens, to ensure that we have got more capacity to do more of the things that the public value, including being ever more visible in our communities. So we're just going to hear what some of the online focus groups had to say.
Well, you promised that you would do a better job on policing Ludlow. You fantastically have, so we'd like to thank you for that. And we have thanked our local police officers for everything they've done. We've got better policing. The crime seems to be dropping in the town. My worry is that if it drops too much, you're going to take away my police officers. I'd rather you didn't do that, because you are actually doing a brilliant job, but it's only happening because you're there.
They're into schools now. They go and they take their equipment in, and they are more visible in schools. This one's a unique area in Osler Street that my 14-year-old has some friends in, and there's quite a high police presence there.
Or here in the village is more feet on the ground. We do have speeders come through our little village. I have lived here about 7 years, and I've not seen a police person walk through or drive through the village at all.
I'd say it's been inconsistent. We had a spell where a couple of PCSOs and sergeants would be cycling through the area, and we're quite urban, and that was good. That's dropped off, and then we did have a session where some loose wall bricks were being thrown at cars and stuff and left in the middle of the road. CCTV was given on that, but again, no presence. So
I'm around the Shrewsbury area, and I guess the first thing I'd say is I think from the community policing side of things, I think it's pretty good. I'm very pro-police, got a 3-year-old, and I think on an individual level, generally, officers pretty good. Always very happy to come say hi to a little boy, which is really good because I didn't want him to be afraid to go and speak to a cop.
Following your 2 meetings, the police presence locally was amazing. Some of the local officers are very good and do a good job and they're good interaction. Generally now, I have seen a slight increase in local policing, but it's predominantly Monday to Friday at the times when everyone's typically behaving themselves. And the time in the evening when things could go a little bit south due to maybe too much liquor, a bit of antisocial behaviour, we get a response. Even on the 9s, we're waiting a considerable amount of time. It just feels that sometimes there's a disconnect. That visibility is not there when it should be there.
Hello, and thank you very much, John. I'm joining speaking really on behalf of the residents of my area within Rubery. We are very, very happy with the increase in the police surgery that we've got, but many residents feel that we would actually benefit better to have SMTs walking around the area and actually speaking to people on a regular basis.
So one of the things that we've just heard from is around, I never see a police officer in my community. Well, I'm not at home at the moment. There could be 20 police officers outside of my house, couldn't they? And I wouldn't know. Now, I'm pretty certain if there was 20 police officers outside my house, it would be on the neighbour gossip over the next couple of days, and I would hear, wouldn't I? So therefore, that sense of sometimes the unusual in our society does go through, but the wider mission of being visible is full of lots of challenges, isn't it? What's your view as Chief Constable and vision as Chief Constable as to how the community should recognise their police service being visible in their community? For example, the incident just given of 7 years and never seeing a police officer drive or walk through the village. What would be your expectation and standard as chief?
I think that responsibility lies with us. So I don't know the village in question, but I will say with total confidence that we will have been there, not just over the course of the last 7 years, but much more frequently than that. You talked about the neighbourhood gossip. I think that our approach should be to amplify our work in local communities so that people do know what we're doing. I think that's something that we're focusing on very heavily at the moment, but it's something that we can improve upon. So the equivalent perhaps of the neighbourhood gossip in a more focused way is local Facebook groups that many people in our communities will be part of. I'm very keen that we amplify our activity within those groups, that we seek to build relationships with the administrators of those groups so that our social media pages, where we will very frequently say PCSO Jones is doing some patrol around local antisocial behaviour hotspots, that reaches as big a pool of people as possible, because there's something unproductive about us doing those things whilst they have an impact in terms of reducing antisocial behaviour if we're not reaching the maximum audience. So I think we're really committed to using all channels available to us to increase the reach of our activity, to ensure that as many people know what we've been doing as possible, particularly when it's good work, to ensure that we publicise our good results, be they dealing with local antisocial behaviour issues or imprisoning people. And then also we use a platform called Neighbourhood Matters, which members of the public can sign up for, which both gives updates, allows two-way engagement. And so we would also look to use that even more than we are doing already to ensure that people get targeted information regarding the activity that their local policing teams have been undertaking in their areas.
One of the bits that came back from the focus group, but I've heard it elsewhere, and the examples of, say, Ludlow, Pershore, Shrewsbury, when something gets raised, we see some improvement for a bit as a result of some either angst or me having a meeting there and raising those issues, that there is an improvement in visibility afterwards. How do you ensure that that it doesn't take scrutiny to make the right levels of visibility everywhere, i.e. improving the consistency?
It's a really interesting question, and I'll try and articulate my answer as best I can. That to a certain extent, I take some confidence in when an issue is raised, people are pleased with the policing response. I think our challenge is to ensure that we retain people's confidence in times when crime levels and antisocial behaviour levels where people live are low. So I'm really keen that our efforts are as targeted and intelligently deployed as possible, so that we are focusing our most pressing efforts on the areas where there is a need for us to be there. So typically either in areas where there is an increased crime rate, so we're dealing with a particular problem, be that burglary or some antisocial behaviour, or targeting particularly offenders, so that we inhibit their offending before it has opportunity to get out of control, or we target our activity where people feel they need us, where there's perhaps a lack of confidence. And sometimes that will be amongst particular communities where there isn't sufficient trust in the police for them to be able to report crime, or it's in communities where there are elevated levels of the fear of crime. So it's a careful balance for us between responding properly where there is a real and pressing need, and also making sure that we are sufficiently present so that people don't experience a fear of crime that is disproportionate. So where I'm arriving at is us being really intelligent regarding the deployment of our resource. And that will always mean, and I think will rightly mean, that when people say there is a problem and we need your help to solve it, that gets our attention. And then perhaps people living in safer areas, we offer a universal policing service so that when anyone needs our help, that we provide it. And then we make sure that we provide a base level of service and engagement through attendance at council meetings intermittently, through some of the neighbourhood surgeries that we hold, through the exchange of information, through social media, and through neighbourhood matters. And through, when we do go to those locations, doing it in a way where we are thinking very carefully about how we reach the maximum number of people. So it might be that we choose to go and patrol outside a school at 3 p.m. It might be that we go to a care home to ensure that those who perhaps might suffer a lack of confidence in police get our direct attention. And then, as I said before, we amplify that activity so that many people are aware of it. So it's a really difficult balance, and it would be remiss of me not to say that we have to balance that need against people's desire to see the police. But I think it's one that we can improve upon by amplifying the activity that we undertake, and people understand where we have been, even when they perhaps haven't personally seen us.
How do you manage? So I get where we're going. How do you also manage the inconsistencies that are there at the moment? I would suggest to you some of the examples that I've just given: Pershore, Shrewsbury, Ludlow, for example. Elsewhere in West Mercia, the public wouldn't recognise the same thing, i.e. see themselves to get a better or more consistent service. Why is there still inconsistent service delivery around things like visibility, the very heart of some of our neighbourhood offer? Why do some policing teams more proactive about sharing their work with their local community, etc.? Why are we still seeing in one organisation inconsistencies in deliver what I think is quite a basic part and a long-standing part of what the policing does for our community?
I think in part because we're a larger organisation and we're made up of people and teams. You're absolutely right. It's a reasonable expectation, and I think we are getting better at setting at a senior level. This is what we expect and want from neighbourhood policing teams, as well as doing the work, ensuring that those who need to know what you're doing hear about it. We are considering how we brigade our resources, so greater supervision around neighbourhood policing. Coming, I think, in 25-26, that should ensure greater consistency, as you've described. And then the other thing that I would suggest will make a difference there is those supervisors having a common expectation of what we expect. And so we've recently refreshed, in consultation with your office commissioner, our local policing charter that sets out what communities can expect from us in terms of our visible policing, our accessible policing, and the way that we engage with communities. So more structure around the methods of engagement that we'll use, around the roles within neighbourhood policing teams, for example, setting out what we expect from our local PCSOs, what we expect from our local sergeants. So giving a greater degree of rigour around what I expect from our neighbourhood policing teams and what the public can expect as well.
We go on to talk about accessible policing, which I think is very pertinent, following the point that you just made. Absolutely, welcome and indeed recognise the power of a uniformed police officer within their community and the reassurance that has, but also what has to go with that is how they are accessible, i.e. The ability to access them rather than just coming across them or the chances of coming across them. You've touched on some of the issues like the availability of neighbourhood matters and the proliferation of social media that are ever more part of our lives in 2025. But also the accessibility isn't just about members of the public making a proactive engagement. It's also about how victims and survivors of crimes and incidents also access their communities, their police officers and the civilians that support policing. I also know that as part of that visibility within communities, that embedding within that community will mean something different in every community, building relationships with key stakeholders, whoever those stakeholders are, and ensuring that the intelligence is not only shared in terms of what is being done for that community, but also understanding what does still need to do. Let's have a hear and see what the focus groups were raising around accessibility in policing.
Work locally, SNT, and sort of Bromsgrove area. Yeah, it's been good from a contact perspective on that sort of lower level of keeping in touch. So I'd say that's good.
We have a local area. I mean, obviously this is for people who sign up for the emails, and they give a regular newsletter listing all the crimes that have been committed locally, numbers to contact.
We're having quite a few problems in our village with antisocial behaviour, and still do to some effect, but we formed a police working group in our parish council, and that really improved communication a lot. It created a shared responsibility between us as councillors and us as a conduit really with the parishioners as well. So
the two things for me are, you know, where I work, wherever I live, it's not that million miles apart, but we're very rural where we are. We're surrounded by fields and nothing else predominantly. There's a system that I signed up for some while ago through Neighbourhood Watch called Neighbourhood Matters. But in terms of my home and keeping abreast of what's happening locally, either direct through, you know, through police or through the system, and getting immediate emails around where they're targeting agricultural buildings and farms, etc. That is spot on.
Not last year, 4 years ago, I dealt with 2 police officers, the same case. They gave me the mobile numbers, so I communicated with them through WhatsApp, and that was quite positive because I was able to send a lot of evidence, and they were quite responsive. I really like that. I think I should say emails as well, but please don't quote me on that.
A bit about Neighbourhood Matters in the session today. So Neighbourhood Matters is a platform online to which public can sign up to and subscribe to. It's also a mechanism for them to get in touch with the force. It's not just one way; it is both ways. And I understand West Mercia Police have got tens of thousands of residents signed up. I suppose I'm interested in your assessment as to whether or not enough of your communities are signed up, and what your aspirations are for sign up, and second of all, are your teams making best use of that resource?
I've spoken already about my desire that people know what we're doing. I think that part of the challenges that policing has experienced regarding confidence in the last few years has been based in part elsewhere in the country on some terrible events involving police officers, but also a sense that some members of the public worry that we're not doing the things that are most important that our response in terms of tackling crime and antisocial behaviour isn't effective. So Neighbourhood Matters is a really important tool in us being able to get the message across that we are dealing with things that you think are most important to us, and that we're dealing with them effectively. So there's no downside as far as I'm concerned in terms of our use of Neighbourhood Matters. We have to be careful when we're sharing messages regarding crime, that we don't overinflate the scale of the issue, that we don't generate a fear of crime that isn't proportionate. But we can do that by also saying what we're doing about the issue. So there are tens of thousands of people signed up. I think it probably relates to about 4% or so of the population. And people who do use Neighbourhood Matters generally find it a really beneficial system. So 98% of users recognise the updates they receive as being useful, and I'm delighted by some of the feedback that we've seen today. All our neighbourhood policing teams are aware of the platform. I regularly go and interact with them, and they tell me about their work they're doing to increase Neighbourhood Matters sign-ups. But as I've mentioned before, I also think that we need to extend our efforts to go to where the public are digitally, as well as asking them to sign up for the platform that we've used. So as well as Neighbourhood Matters, ensuring that the activity that we're undertaking finds its way into people's daily digital consumption through their social media groups and other mechanisms.
In terms of Neighbourhood Matters, I suppose the question I was just asking is, can they do more with what they've got at the moment? I.e., are they making best use of it right now? I absolutely get the other part, but what's your aspiration for all the hard work that you've had to get those people signed up for? You know, what are you going to do with it, and are you maximising it? I suppose is the centre of the question. I'm trying to get the ambition.
So the ambition is to get more and more members of the public signed up, and also to, at the moment, if there's a balance, the balance is towards us updating members of the public, and that's been gratefully received. It would appear as borne out by some of the comments that we've heard in the video. My ambition is that as people grow in confidence in their local policing team, as we strengthen that connection that you've spoken about, that there is a greater use of Neighbourhood Matters for people to engage with us as well. So we've spoken earlier in our conversation regarding 101 and 999. The ability of members of the public, particularly those who represent members of the public, so local councillors, for example, to have direct, meaningful conversation and contact with their Safer Neighbourhood team, as opposed to having go through the public front door, if you like, is something that is beneficial for all parties. I think it will increase trust, it will increase a sense of connection, and it will also reduce the extent to which people are having to come through 101 who don't need to.
Over the so once somebody's in contact with the organisation and they are the victim of crime, as it were, and they have somebody in the organisation that is dealing with it, there is an expectation that the officer in the case will share their contact details directly with them, so they don't have to go via the front door. And it was really pleasing to hear within the focus group that happened in the case that was met. Rachel, you've done a lot of work in your time here over something called the Victim Code of Conduct Compliance, how we absolutely ensure that those people get the standard. What's your assessment particularly around contact across the organisation, of how consistently we are proactively giving direct contact details to those who are subject to crime?
So I think what's really important is we recognise the importance of that first point of contact. First impressions last, and sort of set the tone for the rest of our engagement with our members of the public and victims of crime. We've recently been assessed by our inspectorate, and the first point of contact is generally very incredibly positive, and our call handlers in particular were heralded for their compassion that they use and exercise during the course of that first point of contact. What I would say, and it's kind of followed a bit of a theme throughout this meeting, is that 101 is incredibly busy. Obviously, we prioritise 999. Therefore, if a member of the public has a point of contact, and our officers, if you're already engaged in an incident or a victim of crime, you should be given a point of contact, a telephone number for the officer in the case or the local officer that's dealing with your particular incident. And please use that as the means of further engagement because it stops snarling up that front door. That said, we've got work to ensure that we improve our regularity of providing those contacts and those contact details, not least because that engagement enables ready access, it enables an escalation of issues if things change, but it also, and we know how important in terms of longer term victim satisfaction and trust and confidence in the police, it is that we do the follow-up and that we keep victims engaged in the process and the course of any investigation. So work to do to improve that and drive consistency in those performance improvements, but we recognise how important that is.
It's one of the other elements that we also get fed back is around the having to retell the story, that ability to build up that relationship so they don't have to re-explain, etc. Really powerful. Some of the reference within the video around the policing charter, local policing charter. Indeed, you've mentioned it yourself. What difference will it make? So, just getting launched as we speak, or relaunched as we speak. What difference do you think that will make? Refreshing the charter, and indeed, what difference do you think the communities will feel as a result?
I think, as you say, it's a relaunch. I think the importance of the charter is that it ensures rigour around our engagement with local communities, so that there's a framework so that officers know, broadly speaking, what the specific expectations of them in respect of different communities are in terms of contact, and that communities can know from their officers what they might expect. So I'm typically talking about the means of engagement, our attendance at local council meetings to understand what issues are coming forth from the communities. And so rather than it being simply an organic case of officers looking to understand what the most pressing issues are affecting local neighbourhoods, there is a mechanism by which we will seek that information, particularly from community representatives, identify what level of support we can provide and what level of support the community think they need, agree perhaps 3 local priorities, and then provide a mechanism for updating people as to what we're doing about it. And we've spoken a lot during our conversation regarding the amplification of our work. I am confident that in many cases there is meaningful work going on to address many of the local priorities that are identified. Typically, they're around antisocial behaviour, they're around antisocial driving and people causing danger on the roads. And we should bring the full might of West Mercia Police to bear towards those problems. So we've got specialists in using civil interventions to target antisocial behaviour. We have specialist road policing resources. So this isn't an issue that should simply sit with neighbourhood policing officers. But what should sit with neighbourhood policing officers is that meaningful engagement, that exchange of information, the return of information back to communities regarding what is going on, using all of the constabulary's resources. And the charter really provides the framework by which people understand the expectations that they can have of us in terms of accessible policing and in terms of our engagement back with them regarding what we have done.
Part of that is about ensuring that the elected representatives in our society and parish or town councillors are often in very small communities, so very close to their community. So it's ensuring they've got the information that the work of the police, but also they hear the intel back from those communities. I'm a big fan of parish councils because they are exactly that. They're very close to the community in terms of issue. How does that work in areas where there aren't necessarily parishes? Places like Redditch, for example, large parts of Worcester. How does it? Is there another version for areas that don't have those town or parish councils?
Yes, so we will flex our approach based on the group that we are seeking to engage with. So whether it's a town council, whether it's a parish council, we will consider the number of people who are represented by that body. We'll engage with them to understand what's the best mechanism of us providing updates, understand the level of attendance that we think that we can provide. And some of the examples that you've given are really representative of very large numbers of people. So we'd look to provide updates very frequently. So yeah, this isn't limited to parish councils. It also applies to town councils as well.
particularly keen in the priority element around some of the issues that have affected our society for a long time. And I know we've touched briefly on roads earlier. You know, it might be a long-term antisocial use of the road in the certain location, and how using the charter to give some focus to that priority to see where the solution might come from, I think is particularly exciting. I'm going to go on to talk about fit for purpose police estate. The geography of West Mercia has been alluded to a couple of times, is enormous, spread out across our three beautiful counties. And despite us changing as a society, a lot more online contact, policing is still very much human-based, and indeed a lot of your workforce based out there in the geography of West Mercia. And indeed, I hear regularly that it is valued by our communities. We've more recently just in the process of opening a brand new police and fire station over in Redditch, but also there is some significant work done with our fire colleagues in terms of a number of shared buildings across the southern part of the force area. The buildings have seen some change over time. Over the last 15 years or so, there are less front counters that are staffed during the day, but we have seen the advent of things like doorbells on your operational building. So therefore, if somebody attends and there isn't a staffed counter there, you press the doorbell, and if somebody is available, they will talk to them. We've also seen a huge change in the way that the force are in their communities with the advent of mobile police stations or contact vans, and indeed the proliferation of surgeries or police surgeries in different communities. Let's hear from the focus group and their views on police estate.
About the police estate and how to make it more efficient. To fulfil this, I believe that the West Mercia Police should ignore the county boundaries within its total area, put all the funding in one pot, and then reallocate resources in a more logical fashion, using the centres of population as the hubs for the community police officers, who would cover the areas surrounding their particular hub, irrespective of the inner county boundaries.
And it's going to depend on bodies, and it's going to depend on funding. That we have police stations open every day, not just a couple of days a week.
You go there to tell them about a crime, I just press the button and go through the entire rigmarole of going through somebody on a phone and then putting through to someone else. And by the time they got there, the crime was over, the kids had got away. Access to police officers in Ludlow Police, in the police station, then Bedford would be happy because they'd have access a lot closer.
So one of the focus groups talk about the issue of cross-county geographical challenges. So I think the Tenbury is the place in question. So I think the police station is technically in the fire station, which is technically in Shropshire. The town of Tenbury is in Worcestershire, and indeed it is a very short distance from Herefordshire. I think at the centre of that is how does the police estate ensure that those arbitrary lines of where the counties are drawn shouldn't affect the service that our community have the right to receive?
So we've alluded a couple of times, haven't we, to the geography of the force. We are considering how the force is structured currently. So to ensure that we have got the right resources in the right place to enable us to respond to the public effectively. And I'm confident that in the year ahead, we will start providing an even better service in terms of the responsiveness that I alluded to earlier, by us being able to move resources when required so that there's the right level of response available when the public need it. And that might be caused by things that people might not immediately be familiar with, such as officers being warned to attend court as a result of arrests they've made, has a really significant impact on us. That can occasionally mean that we need to find officers to take their place, perhaps for a week whilst they're in court. And so the way that we're structured and set up our operating model is a really important way of meeting that challenge, and we'll be strengthening that over the course of the next 12 months so that we are less confined by boundaries, and that members of the public can expect the right levels of resourcing wherever they are in the 3 counties at any time. So, and then in terms of technology, it plays a really important part in terms of our ability to respond, so enabling officers to spend more time out with the public. We've still got some way to go here, but all our officers are equipped with laptops so they can do much of their work remotely, so that rather than the police station always being an anchor point that they have to return to between jobs, we provide them with the ability to undertake work out of the police station. We're not as advanced as some other police forces in that regard, and I say that to be completely straightforward with those working. But this isn't just about the physical estate, this is about the efficiency with which we allow officers and staff to go about their work.
How do we ensure that the police estate meets everybody's needs? So I, for example, might be quite happy to do it online and want to fill in a form and then do it that way. Rachel might want to telephone somebody. You might want to go into the police station and talk face to face. How do you ensure the different needs of our community are met as far as possible? And indeed, the police estate is key to doing that.
So all those methods are available to people. The thing that I would say about our police estate is that we have a really large number of police stations across the 3 counties with officers working from them, frequently working 24 hours a day. There are some stations that have a front counter provision where someone can walk in during the day and expect to be able to speak to someone. And then there are others where officers are working from the police station, but people will understand that they undertake their patrol, they go out and make arrests, they interview prisoners. And so the frequency with which they're in the police station may vary. And when they're in the police station, they're typically doing tasks associated with the investigation of crime. So preparing statements, reviewing CCTV, perhaps preparing files of evidence to send to the Crown Prosecution Service. So we have to balance that. We've spoken about the ability to raise an officer by ringing the bell. My expectation is that if that happens, an officer does respond, because we don't know until we go and speak to the person what the level of urgency is. Again, being very straightforward, the work that officer is undertaking may be really, really important to the investigation of crime. They may be undertaking a critical piece of investigative work. And so where possible, we would always encourage people to submit their initial inquiry where they can be guaranteed a response. So either to a front counter at one of the staff stations, online, or via the phone, because then we can undertake that risk assessment that I've spoken about previously in terms of how do we think this inquiry can be compared to other pieces of work that we're doing at the moment. So we can ensure the best response for a member of the public if we can examine what response they need, whether they should perhaps be seen by their local neighbourhood team for an ongoing problem, whether they need the response of their response team, whether perhaps for something serious they might be best serviced by direct contact from a detective. And we can do that by understanding what the nature of their inquiry is, and we can best do that through them seeking us through one of those recognised contact methods.
Resource is finite, isn't it, in terms of there is we can afford lots of things, we can't afford everything. In your professional judgment, why don't you want to spend more of your resource on things like front counters in more communities? Why is there our sense of that they are often quite a long way away from some communities, and indeed opening hours have reduced and changed? Why is that the current balance in terms of the overall benefit to the public?
Ultimately, because my greatest priority is on providing the right service in terms of actually solving someone's problem when they need the police. And we can do that through maximising the number of resources we have available that actually go and deal with the issues in a society. So we have greater number of police officers than ever before. We have a really healthy number of police community support officers. We have a wide number of specialist assets. And I would rather have the maximum number of people to go and deal with issues in community, to solve local problems, than invest those finite resources that you've described in taking note of what those inquiries are, but not being able to respond to them. And we've seen over the years the increase in people contacting us by phone and the increase in people contacting us online. Of course, there will be occasions when people feel the need to go and speak to a police officer at the police station. We will always be able to achieve that. We can offer people a diary appointment at a police station if they were to contact us online or on the phone initially. And if we do increase the level of resourcing in terms of front counter provision, I'm afraid that it will have a direct impact on the amount of other things that we could do. And my commitment is to providing the best possible service, solving problems, addressing crime, and it's those resources that I would always seek to prioritise.
So that covers the four areas that we're going to as part of this session. Holding the force to account. My work as Commissioner is obviously far greater than we've shown in this video. There's much more information on my website, West Mercia PCC, if you put that into your search engine, and the assurance and accountability work you'll be able to see there. The force themselves, of course, publish lots of information around its performance, and indeed there are other inspections available from people like HMIC and other bodies looking at force performance. Is there anything else you wanted to make any final observations around some of the issues we've been talking today around, Richard?
Just a concluding sentence that I think what we've discussed today has been heavily focused on people understanding what we're doing. And it's a significant priority for us to ensure that the work we're doing, I think on many occasions we should be rightly proud of, is reaching those who need to know about it. That work should involve solving local problems, identifying with communities what their local priorities are, and then undertaking meaningful and productive work to try and address them, and then making sure that people are aware of that work going on. So I want to finish by being really clear that providing a high quality of service is right at the very top of our priority list, and that once we've provided that level of service, we should make sure that we're doing enough work to inform people of what's been done.
I know senior police officers always enjoy a good anecdote from their governance, but I think an anecdote I would draw out that is connected to your point is I recently had some contact around some long-running antisocial behaviour in a market town in the county. A very quick call to the local chief inspector. Yep, know all about that. And then a whole list for 5 minutes of exactly what was being done about it. That was quite impressive. And so a senior leader having a really good detail of grip about something. But then the conversation of, well, how will the public know who are concerned enough about it to raise it with me? And I absolutely get that point of it's far better to have the problem of explaining the good performance to the public around some of these issues and the high quality of service than it is than not doing that in the first place. So getting consistency around service delivery, really important, but also that consistency around communication, I think is absolutely a shared priority. It's in my plan. I know it's a plan of yours. I'd also like to thank those that took part in not only in our focus groups, but also raise issues with myself or with the force. Often if service hasn't gone well and it is seen to have failed, I would suggest that there is sometimes an opportunity to recover that service, but there is always an opportunity to learn from what has gone wrong to ensure that we drive improvement. I talk about wanting the police at the heart, wanting the public at the heart of policing, because it isn't just about the things that go well, which there are a huge number of things, but also understanding areas where we do need to drive improvement. So hence why taking part in focus sessions, raising things with me and sharing your experiences are vitally important to improve the service that we rely on, that is our local police service. And I'd like to thank you for taking part. As I said at the beginning, if there are questions or there are issues you want to raise, please do use the comments underneath this video, or indeed make contact via my website. If you Google West Mercia PCC, I'd like to thank you, Richard and Rachel, for taking part in today's session, and for those watching at home.